Give some advice, if you would, to the president and what he could say. We've just seen him over in Davos, trying apparently to sort of reach out to the world, saying it's not as bad as it might appear. What could he say tomorrow night to move forward on trade?
Well, I think the president has a different take on trade than I think previous presidents have had. He has a real focus on trade deficits. I think some of the language he's used recently, for instance, his speech in Davos, his speech previously in APEC, where he is welcoming trade in the United States and welcoming investment in the United States, is seen as more positive. But there are quite a few landmines in the next few months. There
are landmines out there, without a doubt, but he hasn't tripped over too many of them yet. I mean, we have a relatively modest levy against washing machines and against solar panels. But given what he could do right now, he hasn't done that much. He's really talked more, hasn't he?
Yeah, that's right. I think the way trade policy people like me have looked at 2017 was really the year of a lot of talk and posturing, but 2018 is the year when a lot of these decisions need to be made. There are still decisions to be made on two so-called Section 232 national security investigation into imports of steel and aluminum. There's a so-called Section 301 investigation into China's practices on intellectual property and technology transfer. Those are coming up shortly, and they could be quite important decisions.
We talk a lot about the trade tensions between the U.S. and Mexico, but when you zoom out and you take a look at the real issues at the core of the NAFTA negotiations, who does the U.S. have bigger problems with? Is it Mexico or is it Canada?
Yeah, that's a great question. When the NAFTA renegotiations were first launched and when President Trump was first talking about them, he was focused quite a bit on Mexico. And trade people like me knew that the most sensitive issues really were with Canada on the business side. And I think the course of the negotiations have borne that out, where you've seen the Mexicans coming forward, trying to be very flexible, trying to work with the administration, even on some of the proposals that most people think are a little out of the box from this administration, whereas the Canadians, until this round, really didn't seem to be engaging quite as much.
When it comes to the fate of the NAFTA negotiations and you take a look at the political schedule in Mexico and also in the U.S., is it better to wrap up the negotiations before all of these political events come up, or just extend it until next year?
I think often too much can be made about the political calendar. There have been trade decisions and trade agreements that have passed through Congress even during election seasons or right after election seasons. So I think these negotiations really need to be driven by the substance and perhaps less by the political calendar.
Brian, talk about those other actions that are pending right now. You mentioned the 232 proceedings, national security proceedings, and also the 301 on intellectual property. As a practical matter, isn't the 301 on intellectual property potentially a much bigger bomb? Because as a practical matter, even with aluminum and steel, it's not that much money. It's not that much in imports, as opposed to our entire relations with China on intellectual property.
Yeah, I think it depends how you look at it. The so-called Section 232 investigations might set a precedent that other countries in the world could look to and use to protect whatever they deem is important for their national security. So it's a big deal from the presidential aspect, if not necessarily perhaps from the economic aspect. Certainly the 301 is targeted specifically at China. Arguably the 232s are as well. But the real question with respect to the 301 investigation is what remedies will the administration order? Will they order, as is reported, investment restrictions, which might be allowable under the current international trading rules, or will they order increased tariffs, which are not allowable under the rules unless you go through the World Trade Organization dispute settlement proceedings?
So finally, Brian, you're down there in Washington. Give us a sense. Is American industry flooding into the Department of Commerce and the ITC to try to bring new dumping and countervailing duty cases? I mean, after all, the ITC just did rule against the United States on the Bombardier situation.
Yeah, that's right. I think there's probably an uptick in trade remedy proceedings. You should, your viewers should note, the Department of Commerce, for the first time in 25 years, actually self-initiated a trade remedy proceeding recently, which really shows the mindset of this administration on supporting and promoting trade remedies.